We come now to the climax of the greatest miracle that Jesus ever performed, and that is raising Lazarus from the dead. We're in John's Gospel, chapter 11, verses 38 to 44. Jesus, once more deeply moved, came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. "Take away the stone," he said. "But Lord," said Martha, the sister of the dead man, "by this time there is a bad odour, for he has been there for 4 days." Then Jesus said, "Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone. Then Jesus looked up and said, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me." And when he had said this, Jesus called in a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out!" The dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped with strips of linen, and a cloth around his face. Jesus said, "Take off the grave clothes and let him go." This is a powerful and a moving story, one which in purely human terms is impossible, something which would have been denied by every scientist and every observer, if it were not for the fact that this is something which was done before dozens of people who had come out from Jerusalem. There was a crowd of people. It wasn't just done before Mary and Martha. There was a crowd of people, crowd big enough to move that stone away and to shift it. And it was done in Bethany. It was done not far, 2 days walk, 2 miles away from Jerusalem. And the thing which concerns us here is, if this did not happen as it was written, there would have been many people who could come forward and say that wasn't quite how it was. You cannot make a statement of this nature, which would have been resounding throughout the entire Christian world here, and make a statement which wasn't true. It seems to me it'd be very hard to make that statement and make it stick. Let's look at it more closely. Jesus, once more deeply moved, came to the tomb. He was deeply moved previous to that when he saw the tomb, maybe from a distance. And it says that he was deeply moved in spirit when he saw Mary weeping, and the Jews coming along with her also weeping, and he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. And he asked where they'd laid him, and come and see, and he wept there. And now it says he comes up to the tomb. Jesus, once more deeply moved, comes up to the tomb. Huge stone, 6 foot high, rounded, blocking the entrance of the cave. Whoever was in there could not get out by their own unaided efforts. They were locked in. Nothing could move it except maybe a couple of dozen men. Maybe 2 men, 3 men, maybe 4 men could push that stone, but it would be a huge, huge undertaking to do that. One person couldn't do it. So, Lazarus, in a tomb, purpose-built and made, locked into that tomb as one dead. Jesus comes up to the tomb, surveys the size of it, the mountain of it, and it was a cave, it says, with a stone laid across the entrance. "Take away the stone," he said. Now, you must wonder why. They must have wondered why. What are you going to do, Jesus? Are you going to bring him back from the dead? That's what's in their hearts and minds here. That's what they believe that he might be able to do. But notice this. It's too late, says Martha. It's too late to bring him back from the dead. The corpse has putrefied. The body has decayed. It's decomposed. It cannot be restored to what it was. You're too late, Jesus. That's the impact here. "But Lord," said Martha, of the dead man, sister of the dead man, "by this time there's a bad odour, for he's been there 4 days. It's not the bad odour which is the problem here. Putrefying flesh does make a foul odour, particularly in hot countries. But the point is that the body has decomposed. It's too late to restore it. There is nothing that you can do. Can you animate a corpse who has been dead for so long?" Jesus said, "Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?" There's a difficulty here that, or at least it's whether it's a difficulty or not, I don't know, but it's an issue that needs to be grappled with, and it's that if you believed, that conditional statement. Did I not say that if you believed, then you would see the glory of God? Idea is that, or the impression is that if you did not believe, you would not see the glory of God. Therefore, that the miracles which Jesus does seem to be conditional upon the belief of those whom the miracles are done for. That may be the case. Seems to be a recurring pattern. The blind man. But here, Jesus indicates that conditionality, if you believed. Mary did believe. Martha did believe. They both believed that Jesus had the power to save this person. They both believed that if Jesus had been here, he wouldn't have died. Did they believe that he could raise from the dead someone who had been dead for 4 days? Jesus said, "If you believed, you will see the glory of God." So they took away the stone. Now that's an important statement. They took away the stone. If they did not believe, they would have said, "There's no point doing this. What's the point of that? What's the issue? He's been dead for 4 days. Leave him be." But they didn't say that. Such is the power of this person, Jesus. Such is the belief in his power. Such is the authority with which he commands everyone around him, that when he says, "Move away the stone," they do it. There's belief in that. Action is connected to belief. If they didn't believe him, trust him, they wouldn't have moved the stone. Jesus said, "Move the stone." It's against all reason. It's against rationality. It's against the evidence. It's against what we know about life and death. It's against all of that. But still they moved the stone. Why? Because Jesus told them to. No more than that. That's what it means to believe in Jesus. If you believe in Jesus, you do what he says. That's the crux of the matter of belief here. Belief always shows itself in action. And if there is no action, there is no belief. If they had refused to move the stone, what would it show? They didn't believe in him. They didn't believe he could do anything. They believed it would be a waste of time and effort to put into that. But no, 3 or 4 big men push and heave and shift that stone out of the way. The cave is now left open. Jesus looked up and said, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me." There's a connection here between Jesus and God, which Jesus knows that connection is solid and has direct communication with God. Jesus speaks to God, and God the Father speaks to Jesus. That's the only way you can understand that statement, that I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me. But I said this for the benefit of the people standing around. I've asked you for something concerning this dead man. And I know that you've heard me, which means that my request has been granted. And I know that you've heard me, and I've said that to everybody, so everyone knows that God has heard my request. All the people standing here now know that what I'm about to do is done by God on the behalf of my request. Why? So that they may believe that you sent me. If you did not send me, then you would not have granted my request. My request is for Lazarus to rise again. When he'd said this, Jesus called out in a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." It's an imperative mood. It's a command. It's a direct intervention in the powers of death itself. It is a powerful voice which has the power to raise the dead, to bring forth the living, to energize the corpse, to bring life where there was no life, to bring healing where there was only putrefaction and decomposition, to bring life from out of the tomb. Such is the power of the word of this man. Lazarus, come out. The dead man came out. His hands and feet were wrapped with strips of linen, and a cloth was around his face. This is the way in which the dead were dressed in those days. Strips of linen were wrapped around his hands and feet and body. Cloth around his face. That was how the dead were laid out. Grave clothes signifying the death of this man. Jesus said to him, "Take off the grave clothes and let him go." The impact of that? Well, what can you say about the impact of someone who can raise a man from the dead? It must have been awe-inspiring, and an event like no other event has ever occurred in history. If this is a true case, then nothing has been seen like this before. There may have been cases with, I think, Elijah, or was it Elisha? Not sure if that was a raising of the dead, but it was certainly bringing to life someone who appeared to be dead. Here's someone who's been dead for 4 days. Is it possible to understand this story as a fraud, as a fake? Is it possible to give it a purely humanistic understanding or determination? Well, it could be that it was entirely made up. But as I said to you, that doesn't strike me as being true or sensible. People who write the accounts of these things put them out into the public, and they could easily be told me, well, that didn't happen. I was there at the time. Lazarus died. End of story. You can't make such a strong claim as the resurrection of the dead and expect it not to be challenged. And it would have been if the story had been entirely made up. Could it have been a confidence trick? Could it have been a conspiracy between Lazarus and Jesus? You know, Lazarus was his friend. I need a miracle. Lazarus, what I'd like you to do for me is this. I'd like you to one day get ill, pretend to be dead, pretend to die. And then when you're pretending to die, they'll put you in the tomb. I'll come a few days later, and then when I call, you'll just come out. I suppose such a thing is possible. I'm sure some people have thought of it in those kind of terms. But to me, it lacks all authenticity to do that. To do that, you couldn't have someone pretend to die, because doctors and people and nurses and whoever would come along, they only have to check your pulse. They only have to see that you're still breathing to know that you're not dead. You cannot easily pretend that you're dead to the close relatives and people who were there. To be in on the act, you'd have to have Mary and Martha both in, pretending that that's what they did, a whole constructed thing. And then on top of that, you may have to have other people involved in it too. It would be a massive, massive conspiracy to try to construct something of that nature. You'd have to have the people who moved the tomb and laid out the body. They'd all have to be involved in this, though it may have been Mary and Martha who laid out the body and did that. But they would have to be involved in such a conspiracy as such a thing was. And that is so unlikely, because when they confront Jesus, there is real pain and there is real tears, which moved Jesus to tears himself. There is recrimination as well in their statements, which would be unlikely to have occurred if it had been all part of an elaborate plan or trick. No, I think that is beyond, way beyond the realms of possibility here, and something which does not ring true or strike one for more than a fleeting moment of doubt. Either we have a story here of a person who really did raise someone from the dead who had been dead for 4 days, or we have nothing which we understand, nothing which makes sense, nothing which we can put two things together in and come up with a sensible alternative conclusion, other than to say the whole story is made up. There is a strange question as to why the raising of Lazarus does not appear in the other Gospels. And that's a question which I don't have an answer to, because this presumably would have been one of the greatest of all the miracles and would be showcased amongst all of the Gospels. But for some reason it was not in the other Gospels. It's only in John. So I just leave that as a mystery. But it's certainly the case that John was there and saw this. Jesus was there. And the fact that Jesus was so moved and wept puts beyond doubt the feeling that Jesus had for the power of death over human beings and the degradation and disaster and destruction that brings to everyone. The implication too of his own death, hidden away in a tomb very similar to this one, coming up in only a few weeks' time, must also have pulled upon his emotions as it did in the Garden of Gethsemane, knowing that he was setting his face to do that very thing, to end up in that same circumstance for which he was voluntarily sacrificing himself. And then there would be another resurrection, one of a different kind and a different character. For the resurrection of Lazarus is a temporary resurrection, because we can but assume that Lazarus died, as everyone else died, at a later time. But the resurrection of Jesus is a different quality or kind of resurrection entirely. The resurrection of Jesus after the crucifixion is one where there is no further death involved in that. And in that sense, Lazarus' resurrection is an anomaly, a strangeness for the only person maybe who has been resurrected on a temporary basis, only to taste death a second time. Maybe that's considered a cruelty in some case, to understand what death means. I'm sure that Lazarus was questioned many, many times after what's it like to die, what was death like. I'm sure he was pestered by such questions. But all we can say here is that death is the final mystery and the final enemy. But Jesus shows by this act that he has overcome even that enemy by the power of God.